There's a reason why the therapy you tried for your anxiety didn't work. And it turns out it's not actually because you're broken. When it comes to getting the other side of our anxiety issues, there are 1,001 different therapies we might sign up to try and fix the problem. But not every approach is going to work for every person. And over the last 13 or so years of seeing clients one-to-one in my practice, I've certainly heard my fair share of stories about various therapeutic approaches that just haven't worked for people. This can begin to cause a problem of its own if we then make the mistaken conclusion that the reason this amazing therapy that everyone says is working miracles for them didn't actually work for us must be because we're just unfixable. So in this video, in an effort to get rid of any misplaced ideas that you can't be helped, I'm going to cast a skimming stone over the more popular anxiety therapies and explain why they might not have worked for you. And stick around to the end of the video as well, because I'll be explaining what you can do when embarking upon working with a therapist to make sure you have the very best chance of seeing a result. Now, before we get into the list, the first thing to say here is that every therapy I'm going to talk about today is a perfectly legitimate, tried and tested way of getting over our anxiety issues. I'm not saying these methods are useless and carried out by charlatans. There are methods that definitely fall into that category, but I'm not going to be talking about them. Everything I'll talk about today, when applied in the right way by a good therapist with a client in the right state of mind, will very likely get a good result. But not always. No therapeutic approach has a 100% hit rate, and if your therapist is claiming theirs does, then steer well clear. They're basically lying. So here we have some very well-respected therapies and the reasons why they might not have worked for you. Cognitive behavioural therapy, or CBT, might as well be where we start, because this is the type of therapy you'll receive from the National Health Service here in the UK should you get referred by a doctor. CBT boasts, if boast is the right word, a roughly 50% success rate at helping clients feel in some way better. And whilst it certainly has helped people feel less anxious, it's probably the therapy that appears most in my clients' notes when referring to things that just didn't work for them. And I can kind of understand why. CBT has always seemed to me to be a little counterintuitive as a treatment for anxiety, as it involves a lot of conscious attention and focus on the way we think and feel. And as anyone who's ever dealt with high anxiety will tell you, anxiety tends to thrive on our attention, and the more we focus on it, potentially the worse it gets. But whilst these are my own personal misgivings about CBT as an anxiety solution, what I think probably doesn't matter as much as what the clients I've talked to about this think. And what I learnt from them was that their issue was mainly in the amount of ongoing work involved. CBT can involve a lot of homework and continuous effort to apply. When we're already overwhelmed with anxious, racing thoughts, it can very much feel like the last thing we want to do is to further analyse and focus on our thought processes. In the wrong circumstances, CBT can present as requiring more effort and energy than we feel we currently have available. And this is why we might disengage. But it's worth acknowledging here the slightly negatively biased representation I'm giving of CBT. I, of course, only come into contact with the clients CBT didn't work for, and not the ones it did work for. However, I've had just as many clients say that if anything, it made their anxiety concerns worse, as I've had who said it helped. Whilst I'm a big fan of talk therapies and have experienced benefit from counselling myself at certain times in my life, I've also seen a lot of clients over the course of the last decade that weren't so happy with it and didn't have a tremendously positive experience. But in many ways, this can be down to a mismanagement of our own expectations. Counselling is more of an explorative journey than a solution-focused methodology. The aim in itself isn't to fix anything, but to understand ourselves a little better. I once had a counsellor on one of my hypnosis training days who noted at the end of the day that the major differences between our approaches seemed to her to be that I was trying to help facilitate a change in the client and she wasn't. In fact, as part of what she did, she wasn't even allowed to suggest solutions, even if she felt she had them. I remember at the time thinking how frustrating that must be for the counsellor themselves to actually have a good idea of what the problem might be, but not really be able to spell it out for the client. Now, since then, there have definitely been times when a client has come to see me and I've very much felt that they would benefit from more of a counselling approach and recommended they explore that option. But even in those cases, I've always made sure to manage their expectations. A counsellor won't suggest solutions. They'll simply help you explore your own thoughts and ideas. I've had many clients come to see me bemoaning their experience with counselling. And this isn't because the approach or the therapist had let them down, but simply because they'd gone into the process with certain misconceptions about what the process had to offer. And as a result, they'd come away disappointed. Before I go any further, if you're getting something from this video, then please hit that thumbs up button and consider subscribing to the channel for more anxiety related content. You can also become a member of the channel and get unlimited access to my full Clear Your Head anxiety program, as well as exclusive live Q&As with me every Wednesday. Oh, and don't forget to stick around to the end of the video for my tips on how to get the most from any therapy you embark upon. Now, I don't really have many bad things to say about mindfulness. I've seen so many clients over the years who swear by this approach to help them slow down the racing thoughts and ground their mental process so they can get back in control of how they feel from day to day. However, the reason I've seen a lot of clients who are advocates of mindfulness is because practicing it hasn't necessarily sorted out their anxiety issues. Yes, it's given them useful tools to deal with anxiety, but anxiety is still the problem that needs regularly addressing and routinely managing, and that's why they've come to see me. So here lies the problem. When we need a tool like mindfulness to help us deal with our anxiety issues, it just perpetuates in our subconscious the idea that anxiety remains an ongoing issue. I'll often hear clients attribute any spike in their anxiety levels as probably being down to the fact that they hadn't done their mindfulness that day, treating it like the ongoing medicine they have to keep taking to feel well. Whilst the process of mindfulness fixes things in that moment and brings us some respite, for many of the clients I've seen, it's only served to perpetuate the anxious state of mind as their default and reinforce the idea that they are afflicted with some kind of condition that they have to constantly manage. I see a lot of people talk about exposure therapy online these days, and some people I actually really respect advocate exposure as a vital part of anxiety recovery. However, this doesn't change the fact that I've heard countless clients tell me that exposure therapy did nothing to alleviate their anxiety issues and provided them with nothing more than a lot of really anxious or panicky experiences. And I think this happens because all too often we go into exposure therapy thinking that if we do the exposures, if we face the situations that have been sparking our anxiety, then we will eventually desensitize ourselves to that stimulus and the anxiety will stop. When the opposite has happened and they seem to be just making their anxiety worse, they then blame and reject the method. But in reality, desensitization isn't actually the goal here. As with any therapeutic approach, the aim is to learn something new and thus create a different response. When it comes to anxiety, we're not afraid of the situation, we're afraid of how we might react in that situation. The fear is of our own responses. When we approach exposing ourselves to that situation, there is inevitably preemptive anxiety about how we will respond, and this potentially kickstarts the unpleasant experience we are most afraid of. All we end up doing is learning that each attempt at exposure is going to be difficult and unpleasant, thus intensifying rather than desensitizing our responses. The goal here, however, is not to simply keep doing it until we stop responding like that. The goal is to learn that the fear we took into this situation was actually unwarranted. We need to focus less on the experience being unpleasant and more on the fact that we came out the other side unscathed. The fear didn't hurt, damage, or kill us, and we made it out the other side completely intact. This is why exposure can be effective, because it helps us learn the mistakes we've made in the past, teaches us new things about the experience. But the reason people might not get their result, because they are just passively waiting for the horrible experience to get less intense, whilst simultaneously reinforcing how unpleasant the experience actually is. Now, you might be surprised to see this one on the list. After all, I'm a hypnotherapist. Why would I be talking about it not working? Well, I have to include this one on the list because hypnotherapy is second only to CBT in terms of the amount of clients I've seen that have told me they had no joy from a particular therapy. In most instances, the reason for this is because the hypnotherapist in question was using a model of hypnotherapy that relied on the client being able to go into a trance-like state during the session. And there's a number of reasons why this might not happen, and most of them are to do with how comfortable, or perhaps we should say uncomfortable, the client felt with the therapist. Hypnotherapy, perhaps more than any other therapy, relies on a good level of rapport between client and therapist. And as such, if that isn't there, then we might struggle to get a good enough connection to work. What ends up happening in some of these instances is that the client is lying on a couch with their eyes closed, listening to the hypnotherapist, simply wondering if they themselves are doing it right and questioning whether or not they're actually hypnotized. And this is just one of the reasons why I work in a way that doesn't require any formal trance, and the client can be wide awake and in control at all times. I've lost count of the amount of clients I've had great results with that had previously written off hypnotherapy simply because the last time they had the wrong therapist using the wrong method. Now I'm going to repeat what I said at the start of this video, that all the therapies I've mentioned here have achieved great results for people. The purpose of this video isn't to put you off any of these therapies. It's to let you know that if you tried one or all of these and got no joy, it doesn't mean you're broken or that you can't change. It just means that this wasn't the therapy or the therapist for you. In this video, I've simply attempted here to explain in simple terms what might have gone wrong so that you don't have to end a therapeutic process feeling like you just can't be helped. And with that in mind, I promised you I'd finish by talking a little about how you can make sure you get the most from whatever therapy you choose to embark upon in the future. Firstly, you need to pick the right therapist. Now, this is easier said than done, and you may find yourself kissing a few frogs before you find the prince, but it's vital that you feel a good connection with the person you're working with. And hopefully the therapist you approach will offer an initial phone or video call so you can both meet before you have to pay out any actual money. A good therapist should recognize any success is entirely built upon a good level of rapport, and therefore understand that you can't be expected to invest money until you can both at least confirm you have a good level of understanding and connection. Secondly, take the time to understand why the method you are choosing actually works. I saw a client once who told me they'd invested a couple of years in a therapy that had a very spiritual base. I asked her if she was a spiritual person, and she said no, not at all. So it's perhaps not surprising that she saw no changes when she didn't believe in the fundamental principles the approach was based upon. Research the method or get your therapist to explain it, and ask questions if you don't fully understand. You will get better results if you understand why this is potentially going to work for you. And last but not least, always remember that therapy is a collaborative process. Don't go along simply expecting to be a passive participant and have the therapist wave their magic wand. Expect to have to engage in the process and take action both in and sometimes out of session if necessary. Ultimately, it's you that will be making these changes, not the therapist. Think of the therapist more as a guide than a chauffeur. If you do these three things, then expect to have every chance of achieving the result you're looking for, and maybe even making any anxiety issues a thing of the past. If you're interested in working with me or one of the practitioners I've trained in my method, then you'll find the link to contact me in the description. But with all of this being said, however, one-to-one therapy isn't for everyone. And if you're more of a mind to do your own personal therapy and try self-help instead, then here's a video you will definitely want to take a look at next.